So you know the basketball superstar Caitlin Clark.
There's a story unfolding in women's professional basketball that's uncomfortable to discuss but impossible to ignore.
She is in the Women's National Basketball Association. Big star, huge star, brilliant player. Okay, she's on the Indiana team. Now, 64% of the WNBA is black.
Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA as a generational talent, the kind of player that comes along once in a generation.
All right, Caitlin Clark comes in and is immediately the biggest star in the league. Immediately. And merchandising in every other way. Apparently, there's some jealousy that might be manifesting itself into physical.
Her impact has been seismic. Merchandise sales up 600%. League app engagement up 600%. Subscriptions up over 400%. The franchise.
Inappropriate conduct. Here's Stephen A. Smith on it. Go.
You got people that are resentful towards her. But it's really not about her, guys. It's about what she represents. Before she ever came along, there were a lot of outstanding basketball players who happened to be black females that was doing their thing on the WNBA level. And they never got.
She plays for has tripled in value. By every economic metric, she's the most successful rookie in WNBA history. But beneath that success, something disturbing is happening. She's being
this kind of shine. This girl, the Golden Goose, comes along and she wreaks havoc.
Okay, because she's brilliant. Right? That's why she's wreaking havoc. Because she is so good. Now, LeBron James may be the best basketball player.
Fouled at a rate that's completely disproportionate to any other top player in the league. In her rookie season, she absorbed 17% of all flagrant fouls in the WNBA, more than double the rate of any of her peers. Hard fouls.
Ever, he's been watching this situation. Go.
You know, there's a very small number of men and women that actually get to live out their dream of playing a professional sport. And we have grown-ass men and women out here doing whatever they can to try to make sure that does not happen. That is the weirdest thing in the world, but it is what it is, and I'm glad that Caitlin.
Brutal contact, and referees looking the other way. Now, you might think that's just the nature of sports. Rookies get tested. New players get physical attention. But the statistics tell a different story. The rate at which Clark is being fouled is unprecedented. It's not comparable to how other top stars are.
Has a great head on her shoulders.
All right, just to be clear, Caitlin Clark is being fouled at a record rate. Some of them are brutal fouls, and a lot of the refs are looking the other way. And the women fouling her are doing it on purpose. Now, I can't read minds, but it does have a racial aspect to this. But I could be wrong. Joining us now from England is
treated in any other league. And when you dig deeper into the pattern, when you look at who's fouling her and how referees are responding, a racial element emerges that's impossible to ignore. This is a story about how the WNBA's biggest opportunity is also becoming its biggest crisis. To understand what's really happening with Caitlin Clark and the WNBA.
Sean McLean, he's the founder of Origin Advocacy, wrote a piece in a Wall Street Journal about all this that caught my attention. Number one, what's Origin Advocacy? What is that?
Origin Advocacy is a Washington, D.C. based consulting and lobbying firm. We help clients figure out how to best engage the federal government.
Okay, so you're basically a consultant to various individuals. Is there an ideology?
NBA, you have to start with the numbers because the numbers don't lie. Clark is 64% of a league that is predominantly black. But she came in and became the biggest star in women's professional basketball immediately. Not eventually. Immediately. The merchandise numbers
attached to you?
So I've worked in government for nearly 15 years. So I'm very limited government. I'm conservative. I've worked for Marsha Blackburn, Ted Cruz, and in the Trump administration, including the Trump White House.
Okay. Now, what caught your attention about Caitlin Clark?
Caitlin Clark has had a seismic impact on the WNBA ever since she first joined. Merchandise sales increased over 600%.
Prove it. The viewership proves it. The attendance proves it. Before Clark arrived, the WNBA had many outstanding players. Many of them happened to be Black women who were doing incredible things at the professional level. But they never got the kind of shine that Clark got. They never generated the kind of economic impact. They never transformed the league the way Clark has in a single season. And that disparity between the attention Clark receives and the attention those other players received is creating tension. That tension is manifesting itself in ways that are troubling. Aya Wilson, a 3-time MVP and championship winner, came out publicly and said the resentment toward Clark absolutely has to do with race. She said it boils her blood when people try to say it's not about race. Stephen A. Smith addressed it. LeBron James addressed it. Members of Congress addressed it. And the common theme through all of it is the same. Caitlin Clark is receiving treatment on the basketball court that's disproportionate, that's excessive, and that appears to be rooted in something more than just competitive basketball. The question now is whether the WNBA and the federal government are going to actually address it, or whether they're going to continue ignoring it. Let's start with what the data actually shows, because the data is the foundation for everything else we need to discuss. In Caitlin Clark's rookie season, she absorbed 17% of all flagrant fouls in the WNBA. Not 5%, not 8%, 17%. That means out of every 100 hard fouls called in the league, Clark is on the receiving end of 17 of them. Now let's put that in perspective. Clark is one player out of 12 on her roster. There are 12 rosters in the WNBA, which means roughly 144 players on rosters at any given time. If hard fouls were distributed evenly across the league, every player would receive roughly 0.7% of the flagrant fouls. Clark is receiving 17%. That's more than 20 times the average. But it gets worse. Sean Mland, the consultant who analyzed this data, points out that Clark is receiving more than double the rate of hard fouls than any of her peers. Any of her peers. Not just average players. Not just role players. Any of her peers means any other top player in the league. And she's getting fouled at double the rate. To put that in perspective, imagine LeBron James in the NBA receiving double the hard fouls of any other top player. Imagine Lionel Messi in soccer receiving double the physical contact of any other top player. Imagine any superstar in any professional league receiving treatment like that. It would be considered unacceptable. The league office would intervene. The referees would face consequences. But in the WNBA, it's been allowed to continue for an entire season. But here's the part that's even more revealing. Mland points out that the 17% figure is only counting fouls that referees actually called. In reality, there are many more fouls being committed against Clark that referees aren't calling. Rebecca Lobo, a former player and current analyst, has pointed out instances where Clark is being fouled and referees don't make the call. So if you actually did a comprehensive audit of all the contact called fouls plus uncalled fouls, the disparity would be even greater than 17%. Think about that for a moment. We're not just talking about Clark being fouled at twice the rate of her peers. We're talking about Clark being fouled even more than that, with a significant portion of those fouls going uncalled. This isn't random. This isn't just the nature of physical sports. This is a pattern of behavior where one player is being targeted repeatedly, and the referees are either complicit in allowing it to continue or are actively choosing not to protect her. The statistical reality is clear. Caitlin Clark is being treated differently than every other top player in the WNBA. She's being fouled at rates that are unprecedented. She's being targeted on the court in ways that are systematically different from how other players are treated. And the referees are allowing it to happen. Now, referees don't just randomly decide to miss fouls or allow physical play. They make choices about what to call and what not to call based on the game situation, the players involved, the messaging from the league office, and their own biases. If Clark is being fouled at twice the rate of any of her peers, and if those fouls are going uncalled at disproportionate rates, that means decisions are being made by referees not to protect her. That raises a crucial question. Why? Why would referees systematically choose not to protect a player who's being fouled at unprecedented rates? There are a few possibilities. Maybe there's an instruction from the league office to let the game be played physically, but that would apply to all players, not just Clark. Maybe there's a bias among referees that affects how they see fouls involving Clark. But why would multiple referees across multiple games all have the same bias? Or maybe, and this is what the data suggests, there's an understanding, implicit or explicit, that it's okay to foul Clark at higher rates because she's the new star, because she's getting too much attention, because there's resentment about the attention she's getting. And if that understanding exists, if referees are applying a different standard to Clark than to other players, that's not just an officiating problem. That's a systemic problem. That's a hostile work environment. The statistical reality is that Caitlin Clark is being treated differently on the basketball court than any other top player in the league. She's being fouled at unprecedented rates. Those fouls are going uncalled at disproportionate rates. And there's a pattern to it that suggests it's not accidental or random. It's systematic. It's intentional. And it's creating an environment where one of the best players in the world is being subjected to treatment that would be considered unacceptable in any other professional league. Now we need to address the part of this story that's been the most uncomfortable for people to discuss openly: the racial element. Because when you look at who's fouling Clark, when you look at how referees are responding, when you look at what players have said publicly about the situation, a racial pattern emerges that's difficult to ignore. Aya Wilson, a three-time MVP of the WNBA and champion with the Las Vegas Aces, came out publicly and said that the resentment toward Caitlin Clark absolutely has to do with race. She said the criticism of people who say it's not about race boils her blood. That's a direct statement from one of the best players in the league saying that race is a factor in how Clark is being treated. Now, Wilson didn't say that every foul is racially motivated. She didn't say that every player committing fouls against Clark is doing so because of race. But she said that race is a factor. Race is part of the picture. And when a three-time MVP says that, when she's willing to stake her reputation on that statement, that's significant. Stephen A. Smith addressed it during his commentary. He talked about the fact that for years, outstanding black women basketball players were playing in the WNBA at high levels, doing incredible things, but they never got the shine that Caitlin Clark got immediately. They never got the endorsement deals. They never got the media attention. They never got the opportunity to become cultural icons the way Clark has become in a single season. Clark is a white woman who came into a league that's 64% black and became the biggest star immediately. That disparity between the opportunities available to Clark versus the opportunities available to other players, many of whom are black women, is real. And that disparity is creating resentment in some quarters. Now, resentment is a natural human emotion. If you've been an MVP in a league, if you've been one of the best players in the world, and you're telling me that a new player came along and is getting opportunities and attention that you never got, of course there's going to be some level of resentment. That's human. That's understandable. The issue isn't that resentment exists. The issue is when that resentment manifests itself into action. When that resentment becomes the justification for physical targeting on the court. And the statistical evidence suggests that's exactly what's happening. Clark is being fouled at unprecedented rates by players in a league where 64% of the roster is black, and where there's documented resentment about the disparity in opportunities and attention. Is that a coincidence? Or is it a manifestation of that resentment? LeBron James, when commenting on the situation, said something profound. He said that there are very few men and women who actually get to live out their dream of playing professional sports. And it's weird that there are grown men and women in the WNBA doing whatever they can to make sure that Clark doesn't get to fully live out that dream. That's not about competitive basketball. That's about something else. That's about resentment. That's about feeling like someone is taking something that should belong to you. The uncomfortable truth is that the WNBA has a racial dynamic that's been largely unaddressed until Caitlin Clark arrived. The league is predominantly black, but the marketing, the endorsement opportunities, the cultural attention have been limited. And then Clark comes in, a white woman, and immediately breaks through in a way that no black player in recent years has been able to do. And that breakthrough is creating tension. Sean Land, the consultant who analyzed this situation, points out that there's a Title VII element here. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects people from discrimination based on protected classes like race. If Clark is being subjected to a hostile work environment, If she's being targeted based on her race, if referees are applying different standards to her based on race, that's potentially a federal civil rights issue. Now, whether that would hold up in court is a separate question. But Mlan's point is that there are red flags here. Multiple red flags. And where there's smoke, there's typically fire. When you have statistical evidence of disproportionate targeting, when you have public statements from players acknowledging a racial element, when you have referees making different calls involving Clark than involving other players, that adds up to something that deserves investigation. The racial dimension isn't something that should be swept under the rug or avoided in polite conversation. It's the context for understanding why Clark is being treated the way she's being treated. And until that context is acknowledged and addressed, the problem is going to continue. Here's where this story becomes particularly revealing about the WNBA's values and priorities. Caitlin Clark has generated more economic value for the league than any player in recent history. The numbers are staggering. Merchandise sales up 600%. League app engagement up 600%. Subscriptions up 400%. The Indiana Fever's franchise value has tripled. These aren't projections or estimates. These are actual measured increases in measurable economic metrics. For decades, the WNBA has been searching for someone who could generate this kind of interest, this kind of economic impact. The league has wanted a superstar who could drive viewership, who could fill arenas, who could generate merchandise sales, who could make the league economically viable. And then Caitlin Clark arrives and does all of that in a single season. You would think that the WNBA would be protective of their greatest asset. You would think that the league office would be doing everything in their power to protect the player who's responsible for this economic renaissance. You would think that referees would be instructed to watch out for excessive physical play against Clark because Clark is the reason the league is finally getting mainstream attention. But that's not what's happening. Instead, the league is allowing Clark to be fouled at unprecedented rates. The referees are letting physical contact go uncalled. The organization seems indifferent to the targeting. It's like the league is willing to sacrifice the economic benefits they're receiving from Clark in order to maintain something else. In order to maintain what? The status quo? The existing power structure? The comfort of veteran players? That paradox is what's so revealing about the situation. The WNBA has always wanted a superstar like Caitlin Clark. They've invested resources trying to develop that. They've marketed the league trying to attract that kind of player. And then when that player arrives and exceeds all expectations, the league doesn't protect her. The league allows her to be targeted. The league seems willing to risk her long-term health and career in order to maintain harmony with players who resent her presence. That's not how organizations that are serious about their future operate. That's how organizations that are comfortable with mediocrity operate. That's how organizations that value short-term stability over long-term success operate. The WNBA has been given an incredible gift in Caitlin Clark. And they're squandering it by allowing her to be treated the way she's being treated. Think about what this says to the basketball world. If you're a young female basketball player watching the WNBA, if you're watching how Caitlin Clark is being treated, what's the message? The message is that if you become too good, if you attract too much attention, if you generate too much economic value, the league isn't going to protect you. The league is going to allow you to be targeted. The league is going to prioritize the comfort of veteran players over your safety and your career. That's a terrible message for a league trying to recruit and develop the next generation of talent. That's a message that discourages excellence. That's a message that says if you're too successful, you're going to pay a price. From a purely business perspective, what the WNBA is doing doesn't make sense. Clark is their most valuable asset. She's the reason ratings are up. She's the reason sponsorships are flowing. She's the reason the league is finally getting mainstream attention. And they're allowing that asset to be damaged by excessive physical contact. If Clark gets injured, if the targeting takes a toll on her body, if she becomes so frustrated with how she's being treated that she leaves the league, what happens to all those economic gains? They disappear. The ratings drop. The sponsorships dry up. The league goes back to being marginalized. So why is the WNBA allowing this to continue? Why are they willing to risk their most valuable asset? The only explanation that makes sense is that there's something the league values more than the economic success Clark is generating. And based on the evidence, that something appears to be maintaining harmony with veteran players, respecting the existing power structure, and protecting the feelings of players who resent Clark's presence and attention. That's a choice. And it's a choice that will define the WNBA's future. Either the league commits to protecting and developing their biggest star, or they continue on the current path and accept the consequences of that choice. Right now, they're choosing the latter. And that choice is going to cost them in the long run. One of the most significant aspects of this story is the suggestion that this isn't just a sports issue anymore. It's a federal civil rights issue. Sean Mlan, who works as a consultant on federal government engagement, points out that if Caitlin Clark is being subjected to a hostile work environment, if that environment is targeting her based on a protected class like race, then the federal government potentially has authority to intervene. This is important because it takes the issue out of the hands of the WNBA and puts it in the hands of federal regulators. It's no longer about what Commissioner Kathy Engelbert decides to do. It's no longer about whether the league office wants to address the problem. If there's federal jurisdiction, then the federal government can investigate, can subpoena communications, can require policy changes, can impose penalties. Mlan provides examples of situations where the federal government has intervened in sports. Major League Baseball and steroids, the NFL and concussions, USA Gymnastics and Dr. Larry Nassar. And more recently, the Trump administration has gotten involved in addressing disparities in NCAA sports, particularly in fencing, swimming, and gymnastics. The precedent exists for federal government involvement in sports when civil rights issues are at stake. The argument is straightforward. Caitlin Clark is receiving treatment on the basketball court, being fouled at twice the rate of her peers, being targeted physically at unprecedented levels that appears to be based on her race or appears to be motivated by racial resentment. That treatment is creating a hostile work environment. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, employers are responsible for preventing hostile work environments based on protected classes. Now, the WNBA is a private organization, not the federal government. But the Civil Rights Act applies to private employers too. And the WNBA, as an employer of basketball players, has a responsibility to provide a safe working environment free from harassment or discrimination based on protected classes. If the league is failing to do that, if referees are allowing physical targeting based on race to continue, then there's a potential federal civil rights violation. Mlan is careful to note that this isn't necessarily an airtight legal case that would definitely succeed in court. But he's pointing out that there are red flags, multiple red flags, and where there's smoke, there's typically fire. An investigation by federal authorities could uncover communications, could reveal policy decisions, could expose the reasoning behind why referees are making the calls they're making. And those communications and decisions could be much more damning than the surface-level observations we have now. Think about what happens when federal investigators get involved in a situation like this. They subpoena emails. They interview witnesses. They look at communications between the league office, coaches, referees, and players. They examine whether there were instructions given about how to officiate games involving Clark. They look at whether there were discussions about protecting certain players and not others. Suddenly, the ability for the WNBA to manage this situation quietly disappears. Suddenly, the league can't just make internal policy changes and hope the problem goes away. Suddenly, there's accountability at a federal level. And that accountability could reveal things that the league would prefer to keep hidden. That's why the suggestion of federal involvement is significant. It's not about criminalizing basketball. It's not about turning sports into a court case. It's about saying that if there's evidence of civil rights violations, if there's evidence that a player is being subjected to a hostile work environment based on race, then federal authorities should investigate. And if they find violations, then they should intervene. Mlan points out that this has been done in other contexts. The federal government got involved when there were concerns about safety in the NFL. The federal government got involved when there were concerns about abuse in USA Gymnastics. The federal government has shown a willingness to intervene in sports when civil rights are at stake. So why not in the WNBA? The answer, of course, is that the WNBA would prefer to handle this internally. The WNBA would prefer to make policy changes without federal scrutiny. The WNBA would prefer to avoid the publicity and the potential penalties that come with a federal investigation. But if the league doesn't address the problem voluntarily, if the league doesn't take action to protect Caitlin Clark, then federal intervention becomes more likely. That's the implicit threat here. The WNBA can address this problem now voluntarily, on their own terms. Or the federal government can get involved and address it on federal terms. Those are the two options. And based on the league's response so far, based on the deflection and the inaction, federal involvement seems increasingly likely. What's most revealing about this entire situation is that it's a complete systemic failure at every level of the WNBA. The league office has failed. The referees have failed. The teams have failed. The coaches have failed. And in some cases, players have failed. Every single part of the system that should be protecting Caitlin Clark has instead either ignored the problem or facilitated it. Let's start with the league office. The WNBA has known for an entire season that Caitlin Clark is being fouled at unprecedented rates. The league has access to the same data that everyone else has. They can see the statistics. They can watch the tape. They can see the pattern. And they've done nothing about it. No rule changes. No referee retraining. No public statements about protecting their biggest star. Nothing. The league office had an opportunity to take action, to send a message that this behavior would not be tolerated, to protect their most valuable asset. Instead, they've allowed the situation to fester. And by allowing it to fester, they've sent their own message. They've told players and referees that it's acceptable to target Caitlin Clark. They've told the basketball world that the economic success Clark is generating isn't worth protecting her. Then there are the referees. Referees are supposed to be impartial arbiters of the game. They're supposed to enforce the rules equally for all players. But if Clark is being fouled at twice the rate of her peers, and if those fouls are going uncalled at disproportionate rates, then referees are applying a different standard to her. They're either choosing not to protect her or are being instructed not to protect her. Either way, that's a failure. Either way, the referees are complicit in allowing Clark to be targeted. They have the power to call fouls. They have the power to protect players. And they're choosing not to use that power for Clark. That's a systemic failure. Then there's Stephanie White, the head coach of the Fever. White has a responsibility to advocate for her players, to protect them, to speak up when they're being treated unfairly. And White has been largely silent on the issue of how Clark is being treated. There's been some deflection, some vague statements about player safety, but no passionate advocacy for her star player. That's a failure. The Fever organization has also failed. The organization that benefits most directly from Clark's presence, that has tripled in value because of her, that fills arenas because of her, has done little to protect her. No aggressive statements about how she's being treated. No demands to the league office for action. Just acceptance of the status quo. That's a failure. And then there are players. Some players are committing the fouls. Some players are perpetuating the targeting. Some players have publicly acknowledged that race is a factor in how Clark is being treated, but continue to participate in the targeting anyway. That's a failure. That's choosing resentment and competition over basic respect and player safety. What makes this systemic failure particularly egregious is that it's preventable. If any part of this system had stepped up, if any level of authority had said, "This is not acceptable," the situation could have been corrected. If the league office had issued a directive about protecting players from excessive physical contact, the referees would have enforced it. If Stephanie White had publicly stated that she expects her players to be protected, that would have sent a message. If the Fever organization had demanded action from the league, that pressure could have made a difference. But instead, every level of the system failed. And the failure cascades downward. When the league office doesn't act, it tells referees that the behavior is acceptable. When referees don't protect Clark, it tells players that they can continue targeting her. When coaches don't speak up, it amplifies the message that this is normal. When organizations don't demand action, it confirms that no one really cares. The result is a situation where the most valuable player in women's professional basketball is subjected to treatment that would be considered unacceptable in any other professional context. She's being fouled at unprecedented rates. She's being targeted based on race. And every part of the system that should protect her has either ignored the problem or facilitated it. That's a systemic failure. And systemic failures require systemic solutions. It's not enough for one entity to change. The entire system has to change. The league office has to change. The referees have to change. The coaches have to change. The organizations have to change. And players have to change. Until that happens, until every level of the WNBA commits to protecting Caitlin Clark and enforcing equal treatment for all players, this problem is going to continue. And the consequence of that continued failure is that the WNBA is going to squander its greatest opportunity for growth and legitimacy. What's happening to Caitlin Clark in the WNBA is part of a bigger picture about how society handles success and excellence when it comes from unexpected sources. Clark came into the league, broke every attendance record, broke every viewership record, broke every merchandise record. She didn't do it by being good. She did it by being transcendent. She did it by being one of the best players the world has ever seen. And in doing that, she disrupted an existing order. She disrupted narratives about who the biggest stars in women's sports should be. She disrupted the marketing strategies that had been in place. She disrupted the comfort level of established players who had been considered the top of the league. And disruption creates resistance. Disruption creates resentment. And sometimes disruption creates hostility. The hostility that Clark is experiencing isn't unique to the WNBA. It's a pattern that plays out across society. When someone from an unexpected source becomes extremely successful, when someone who doesn't fit the established pattern rises to prominence, there's pushback. There's resentment. There's an effort to pull that person down. But in professional sports, that pushback often manifests itself as physical contact on the court. In the WNBA, it's manifesting as excessive fouls, targeting, and a refusal to protect a player who's being treated differently than everyone else. And the broader question is whether society, whether the WNBA, whether the federal government, whether fans is willing to address that hostility or whether it's going to be allowed to continue. Stephen A. Smith made a point about this. He said that before Clark came along, there were many outstanding basketball players who happened to be black women doing incredible things in the WNBA. But they never got the shine that Clark got. They never got the opportunity. And that disparity between what's available to Clark and what was available to other players is creating resentment. Now, that resentment is rooted in something real. If you're a multi-time MVP in a league and you're not getting the opportunities that a new player is getting, of course there's going to be some resentment. That's human. That's understandable. But the question is whether that resentment becomes an excuse for bad behavior. Whether that resentment becomes the justification for targeting someone on the court. And the evidence suggests that for some players in the WNBA, it has become an excuse for bad behavior. Aya Wilson said publicly that the resentment toward Clark is absolutely about race. She said it boils her blood when people deny that. So we have a 3-time MVP explicitly acknowledging that race is a factor, that resentment based on race is a factor, and that players are behaving in ways that are rooted in that resentment. But understanding the root of the problem doesn't solve the problem. Understanding that resentment is understandable doesn't justify targeting someone on the court. Understanding that disparity exists doesn't justify allowing a player to be fouled at twice the rate of her peers. What needs to happen is clear. First, the WNBA needs to acknowledge the problem. The league office needs to publicly state that Caitlin Clark is being treated unfairly, that the level of physical contact she's experiencing is unacceptable, and that the league is taking action to address it. That acknowledgement is necessary for credibility. Second, the WNBA needs to implement specific policy changes. Referees need to be instructed to watch out for targeting of any player, but specifically to ensure that no player is being fouled at rates that are disproportionate. Coaches need to be held accountable if their players are engaging in excessive physical play. Teams need to be sanctioned if they're part of a pattern of targeting. Third, the conversation about race and opportunity in the WNBA needs to happen openly. The league needs to address the disparity in opportunities, in marketing and endorsement deals. The league needs to commit to building multiple superstars, not just one. The league needs to ensure that opportunity isn't limited by race or by narrative. And finally, everyone in the system, players, coaches, referees, league office, teams needs to commit to a culture where excellence is celebrated, where success is protected, and where players are treated with equal respect regardless of race or background. What's happening to Caitlin Clark is about more than just basketball. It's about whether society is willing to protect excellence when it comes from unexpected sources. It's about whether we value growth and opportunity, or whether we're comfortable with resentment and hostility. It's about whether the WNBA is going to be the league that protected its greatest asset or whether it's going to be the league that squandered it. The choice is the league's to make. Caitlin Clark has given the WNBA something it's been searching for decades. She's given it a superstar. She's given it growth. She's given it mainstream relevance. She's given it economic viability. By every measure that matters, she's been the most successful rookie in WNBA history. But beneath that success, a disturbing pattern has emerged. Clark is being fouled at unprecedented rates. She's being targeted physically in ways that are disproportionate to any other player in the league. And the targeting appears to have a racial element rooted in resentment about the opportunities and attention she's received. The WNBA has failed to protect her. The league office has failed to act. The referees have failed to enforce equal standards. The coaches have failed to advocate. The organizations have failed to demand change. Every level of the system has failed. And now what was initially a sports issue has become a potential federal civil rights issue. Congress is asking questions. Consultants are pointing out Title VII violations. And the federal government is starting to pay attention. The WNBA still has time to address this voluntarily. They can take action now. They can protect their greatest asset. They can commit to equal treatment for all players. They can address the underlying issues about race, opportunity, and resentment. Or they can continue on the current path and hope that federal intervention doesn't happen. But hope isn't a strategy, and ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. Eventually, accountability comes, either through the actions of responsible organizations or through the force of federal law. The WNBA has made its choice so far. Now they have to live with the consequences of that choice.